Ceci étant dit, étant fait, maintenant on va passer au prochain item qui évidemment va vraiment le sujet, c'est toute la question de maisons abordables, de affordable housing, le grand thème pour la journée aujourd'hui. Et nous avons parmi nous plusieurs invités, mais entre autres pour diriger toute la discussion, mon bon ami Mike Randall. Et je vais te laisser présenter tes invités. Ça va? Merci, Mike.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Thank you very much, Yvan. And welcome. And nice to see each of you again. I was saying it was a much better drive up this morning to talk about housing than last year when we drove through a hurricane to get here. So that was more enjoyable. We're in for a great discussion this afternoon. We're really continuing a conversation we started a year ago around housing. And I know each of you talks about housing a lot within your individual cities. And in the last year, we really have declared a crisis in New Brunswick. The province has launched a new strategy. They've beefed up the Housing Corporation, Housing NB. The majority of the regions are looking at or have already looked at putting together their own housing strategies. So we've invited a great group of folks to come together, and I'll invite them up here to the stage. The Mayor of Bathurst, Her Worship Kim Chamberlain, will be joining us this afternoon. Economist, author, educator, Herbert Emery is part of our conversation this afternoon. The CAO of St. John, Brent McGovern. The CEO of Habitat for Humanity for New Brunswick, Perry Kendall. And the Director of Housing Programs for the Province of New Brunswick and Housing NB, Greg Forestell. Please invite them up with me. So the format for this afternoon, I've given each of our panelists a few minutes for them to come up and share with you some of their initial thoughts around housing as it pertains to their municipality, to their organization, or in Herb's case, as it pertains to our future of the economy, and how important housing is in the province of New Brunswick. So I'm going to start in no particular order, but I'm going to invite each to come up and say a few words. Then we'll get into the discussion around housing. It will be open for questions. We'll keep this a conversational topic today, and please at any time jump up and ask any questions that you may have. I'll start to my immediate right, and I'll invite Brent to come up and say a few words. No, just talk about St. John.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Brent McGovern, as Mike has mentioned, CAO with City of St. John. Housing, of course, is of critical importance to us, as I'm sure it is to all of you. We have in St. John a more vulnerable population. We also have an older housing stock, being first incorporated city in the country. So, the needs are great in our community. We have about 4 to 5% of our housing stock is actually, nonprofit housing. We have about 1,200 people on the waiting list looking for affordable housing. Actually, for affordable homes, that equates to over 2,000 people on the waiting list. And so when we look at what's in the pipeline, there's a number of buildings approved. We have an affordable housing action plan where we're seeking to have 30% of our all new construction have affordable housing in it. But we have, challenges like, obviously the province has undertaken to invest $100 million. We understand that's going to equate to about 40 new doors in our community. So 40 new doors doesn't go, very far in terms of achieving the 1,200 on the waiting list. We have been successful recently under the Rapid Housing Initiative program, and that's giving us 39 additional units. So pretty insignificant. We're barely scratching the surface, I would say, despite all the resources and effort that is going into it. And the resources and effort are significant, which I'm sure we'll get into this afternoon. So look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brent. Next, I'm going to invite Greg Forestell. Greg is the Director of Housing Programs for Housing NB. And as you know, they launched earlier this year the new housing strategy, Housing for All. Greg.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. I guess I'm the substitute. First was the minister, and she was unable to come this weekend, and then our CEO got called out of town, so you get me. So I hope to be able to answer any of your questions today. But as Mike said, we have recently launched our new provincial housing strategy, Housing for All. So as part of the engagement exercise that went into the development of that strategy, one of the questions, probably the number one question or the first question that was asked, was if there was anyone in any of those sessions who thought that there was one solution to our housing problem, a silver bullet, so to speak. And as you can expect, not one hand went up. This strategy reflects that. The strategy is taking an all-of-government approach, one team, one GNB. If you've heard that slogan over the last year or 18 months, that's sort of the approach that we're taking. But in fact, it's really a community approach to housing. If you had the opportunity to look at the strategy, you'll see that every level of government is visible there. Every community entity, nonprofit sector housing, private sector housing is all reflective in that strategy. So it's a comprehensive strategy that looks at the needs and factors impacting all levels of housing. It's divided into 4 pillars: healthy and competitive housing market, affordable homes for low to moderate or mid-income earners, a safe home for vulnerable New Brunswickers, and a strong foundation for our housing system. Just to highlight a few of the programs or the initiatives and the investments that we're making for employers and their employees, and the need for economic development and increased productivity, particularly in the rural areas of the province, in partnership with the federal government and with the Housing Hub of New Brunswick. We've launched the Rapid Rural Workforce Housing Pilot. And so looking forward to working in the rural communities to not only increase housing for the employees that are required to increase that productivity, but also my clients, Housing NB clients, as well as general market rent housing as well. For the tenants in New Brunswick, they'll see an investment of $3 million over the next 2 years to establish a rent bank. Again, for tenants, we will have invested $22 million annually to a new direct-to-tenant rental benefit. This will see about 3,000 households annually initially come off the housing wait list and then remain off the housing wait list for years to come. So we hope to see an increased investment in that program as we move through the first year or two of that pilot. For those living with a disability and who want to live more independently, the direct-to-tenant benefit will also work to keep those individuals housed in conjunction with our portable rent supplement program. These individuals who have mobility issues primarily are able to sustain and access safe housing options that are best to meet their needs. Also, we've identified in the strategy that there's a need for student housing. In partnership with PEDAL, the province of New Brunswick is going to launch a New Brunswick Public University's student on-campus housing fund. So that is under development as we speak, and so further details will be known in the coming days. And another great idea from our stakeholders is, of course, and I've actually had several conversations with many of you in the room, the use of government surplus property being made available specifically for the use of, or for the development of affordable housing. And so we're working on an easier way to, and a quicker way to make that happen. Properties that the province no longer needs, and those that eventually become surplus due to the tax arrears. We're hoping to smooth that process out, make it quicker, and get those lands into the hands of developers, specifically for nonprofit housing. And of course, as Mike mentioned and Brent mentioned, we haven't built any houses in the New Brunswick Housing Corporation in over 38 years, almost 40 now. And so we're looking to build more public housing units. 100 new units were announced back, or 380 units were announced, $100 million last October. And of course, we can't do it alone. So we've partnered with their friends at Habitat for Humanity and going to make over the next several years over a $5 million commitment to Habitat for Humanity's, or sorry, $3.5 million supporting those that organization in the development of affordable housing. So also, again, infrastructure needs. We've talked about that. Our colleague from, or your colleague from Quebec, Mayor Pierce, talked about the need for development funds. And so our colleagues at Regional Development Council are working on a project for that. And of course, we can't build any of these new affordable units if we don't have a skilled workforce. So there's work underway to increase that. So I hope to be able to answer some of your questions. Those are some of the highlights of our strategy. And again, thank you for having me this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Greg. You know, we'll get into this, but housing is a challenge in each of our cities, each of our municipalities. It's a challenge provincially, and it's something that mayors and councils, each of you sort of it's become part of your everyday, even though if you search the role of a municipality on Google, you won't find housing there, but it is something that preoccupies everything you do. Give us a little insight into what's happening in her municipality, the Mayor of Bathurst. Kim?
Not as tall. I'm going to bring this mic down, even with my heels. So the city of Bathurst has a population of 15,000 people. We have less than 2% rental capacity at the moment. We see a massive increase on rental property. I have my daughter's best friend, her mom, she's been living at the same apartment, in a basement apartment, for 10 years. New owner came in, so she pays $800 a month plus utilities. Her rent went up to $1,300 a month plus utilities, no questions asked. You have 3 months, if not, you're out. So that is another major issue that I think that the province should get involved. Currently at the Regional Service Commission, we are completing a study, a housing study, to better understand the situation and the target housing types that we're looking for. The study is not complete, but we're going to be working on that. Immigration is a huge file. We want to talk about international students. I've been working in immigration. I was a director at the Multicultural Association. I've been doing business immigration for the last 10 years. And we had 2 international students sleeping on the streets. They landed here, they have no place to go. We were able to find them a place to stay, which we're calling couch surfing for now. So that, another issue in that area. The population is increasing, immigration is increasing, families that are coming into Bathurst is unbelievable right now. It's much more so than it was before. And Vitalité has hired and will be hiring 100 nurses per year for the next 4 to 5 years. We have about 17 of them that have landed already. We've told them, don't come with your family. There is no place for them right now, let alone to try to find a place for you to stay. We have Vallée-Lourdes, that is a level 3, level 4 nursing home that is in Belgium right now, hiring 30 nurses. Again, we do not have the capacity. At the social development side, in our area, there's about, and I'm not just talking about Bathurst, but the Chlore region, so Belle Bay, Beldoun, there's about 632 either families, disability, or elderlies that have no place to stay and cannot afford where they're living. So there's a waiting list there. Our women's shelter, we received 31 women and 18 children in the last year. They were basically saying about 1,200 crisis calls just in our area in 1 year. So where are we putting them once we take them out? They have no place to go. Homelessness is a huge issue for us. And it's becoming, because we were saying at the beginning it's Moncton, Fredericton, until I actually had a meeting with Alain Savoie that told me that in March we had 42 cases in Bathurst, and 11 of them were sleeping on the streets. In August, we're at 52 people. And as a whole with statistics, we have over 2,000 homelessness in New Brunswick. 528 of them have been on the streets for more than 6 months. We have a lot of work. It's not just housing. But at our end, population is increasing. People are coming in from Ontario. They're buying houses sight unseen. So that house is probably worth $179,000. They're paying 30% above market price, or apartment buildings, and then they're rented and people cannot afford it. We have Habitat Soleil, which I'm happy to see that we have, nonprofit. He has been working on this file for a while. He has all the land necessary, but it seems like he's been at block roads from the beginning when he did his presentation to City Council over a year ago, and we still haven't moved forward. And I really hope that they are going to be working with the nonprofit, because they're the ones that are in the possibility to offer more affordable housing, because we can get all the developers we want. If they turn around and they charge rent $2,000, we are not targeting the low-income housing that really need it. In all the immigration, it's not all professionals coming in. A lot of them are coming to work in nursing homes. A lot of them are working at Tim Hortons. It's great for Tim Hortons. It's great for the nursing homes. But when you're making $18 an hour, 3 kids, you can't get by. It needs affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we keep hearing that not-for-profit sector is going to be a big part of this solution, and in the housing strategy, Housing for All, there is a partnership with Habitat for Humanity. So we're very pleased to have Perry Kendall, who's the CEO of Habitat for Humanity for New Brunswick, and going to give us a bit of an overview on how they see housing in New Brunswick today. Perry.
Thank you, Mike. It's an honor to be here for a few different ways. First off, I've lived in 4 of the 8 cities in New Brunswick. Habitat for Humanity either currently has or is about to have families living in every one of the 8 cities in the province. We have 84 families currently in homes, 330 New Brunswickers. But fact is, as was said, that's nowhere near enough. So I'm here today. I hope this isn't just, I'm not here solely to speak from the Habitat for Humanity perspective, but to speak from the nonprofit housing sector, and to help kind of give perhaps a bit of a voice from that lens. I've been working with Habitat for Humanity for coming on 8 years now, and we've recently amalgamated our organizations in the province to become Habitat NB. So Habitat for Humanity, we bring communities together to help families build strength and stability through affordable home ownership. So this is, our model is based around affordable home ownership through the Habitat mortgage model. But we're also focused on what I call long-term affordability. It's about building homes that are modest but well-built, energy efficient, and truly will be affordable for the long term. It's so important that we make sure that families moving into affordable housing, whether it be our model or others, that remains affordable over the course of the time they're living in those homes, whether it be rental, whether it be a home ownership program. I'm really pleased to see the various areas of focus that the provincial government now has around affordable housing through the strategy that was recently released. It's so wonderful to see the focus on affordable housing in the municipalities across the province and the responsibility that municipalities are now taking to help address this issue, because it's going to take all of us. The municipalities, the provincial government, the federal government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector to address this issue and make a difference. We have to work together, and we've absolutely have to increase our focus on this and increase the number of homes and the number at all levels of the housing continuum in order to address this problem. So I thank you for the invitation to be here. I hope I can offer some insight, again, whether it be from our perspective of Habitat for Humanity or the perspective of the nonprofit housing organizations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Perry. And certainly, last but not least, the economics of all of this and the impact it's going to have on our ability to move our province forward, the impact that housing has in terms of attraction and retention and growth is so significant. Give us a little bit of insight into that, Herb Emery.
Thanks. I can live with the least category, so that one's okay with me. When I moved here in 2016 and presented to a very similar audience, there were a few themes that came up about what did the province have going for it. And one was abundant labor, relatively low wages, but also affordable housing and good livable communities. What's happened over time is no one really paid enough attention to that. There was some pressure building on housing in particular. Social problems weren't being addressed by the level of province. They were starting to show up more and more in the municipalities. And again, there wasn't really a big problem until COVID hit. And no one's really appreciated just how unique that COVID population bomb for outside the GTA was. So even when we had immigration going to Toronto, it's displacing population outside of Toronto, and that's impacting other markets. When we had the situation where no one wanted to live in tiny apartments in downtown Toronto, you saw a huge impact on Moncton, Charlottetown, and Halifax in particular, but the ripple effect went through the province. So within 2 years, we saw house prices increase about 50% or more after a decade of not growing by more than the rate of inflation per year. Now, that's unprecedented, and it was also not driven by what you'd call healthy growth in the province, which was investment and expansion of the business sector. It was literally driven by people looking for a cheaper place to live, facilitated by remote work, different kinds of employment where they didn't depend on earning their income here. And so now what you have is something called the Dutch disease, that people who want to live here but work somewhere else are pricing people who work here out of the housing market. It's creating winners and losers, and as a consequence, the businesses that depend on paying labor what they can afford out of their revenue, not what IBM can pay out of Silicon Valley, just to give an extreme example, you start to hollow out your business sector if you can't get the affordability of housing under control. And so this is where a lot of the problems are going to be for the region. Now, is it going to be easy to fix? No way. The biggest problem you have now is you've become so important to the federal government because they view their survival politically as based on the public believes mayors and councils are responsible across Canada for this problem. The federal parties have come up with a scapegoat, and so it's going to complicate everything now when you have conditional grants that will now be tied to you appeasing the federal government in terms of what you do. You then have another problem that this housing shortage has created winners and losers within your communities. People who own their homes have had a windfall gain in wealth, tax-free, and there's incredible pressure from younger Canadians to eliminate capital gains exemptions on housing to bring those prices down and make it affordable. But at the same time, people who live in a community, there's intense pressure to change the nature of their neighborhoods, to add density, to bring in more diverse populations to live there. And the resistance grows because they like the wealth, but they don't like the change. And having lived through this in a few provinces now, I can tell you that whichever way this plays out, none of your cities are going to be the same at the end of it. They're going to transform, and it can happen one of two ways. One is it's managed well, and you have a vision for what your community looks like. You figure out how to get through the tough processes, integrate a portfolio of solutions, not a single one. And you do have to address that low-income affordable group, particularly when provinces refuse to provide the incomes that those households need. And so in the absence of that, everything falls to the cities, and you get responsibility without power, which is the worst place in the world to be. And so this is leading to, you're going to see political pressures to reform fiscal federal relations, to maybe bring in a third level of government like we were seeing pressures for in the 1990s when everything was being offloaded from feds to province to municipalities. The same dynamics playing out again, and as the federal government spending power starts to diminish, you'll start to see the provinces again backpedaling and putting more on the municipalities. So we might as well look ahead and start planning for what's about to hit and think creatively about where are we going to get the finance to get these houses, which organizations are we going to support to do it, and what are we prepared politically to do to make these things move ahead even when there's opposition. If we don't manage to do this, we're going to have a very different province and cities in 10 years' time. You may not recognize them. They may either be back to where we were in 2015 because we've been here before in New Brunswick. You've been here in the early 2000s. You were verging on it again towards 2008, and each time it reversed and went away. So if you want to keep the successes going, you have to resolve this problem, and it requires, I think, sort of an all-hands-on-deck approach. It's not going to be solved by doing something like just screaming rent control all the time. It really requires a portfolio of solutions. And it really requires working together with cooperative approaches to things, including getting the provincial government to understand that they have to take their income assistance responsibility seriously. And the only warning I want to leave you with is, as bad and tough as things may seem now, they can get a lot worse. I dropped my son off in Kingston. Kingston is far worse than Fredericton, Moncton, and St. John with the homelessness issue right now. London, Ontario, where I'm from, population of 400,000, has 2,000 unhoused. They're building 5 homeless hubs, which will cost $2 million per year to operate. So $10 million on their budget just to operate that for 2,000. So they're already worse off in one city than we are as a province of 750,000. If we don't want to be those guys, it's time to start getting moving, but you can't count on the province and feds to bail you out. It's going to have to come from solutions at the local level because, as has been noted, this is the level of government closest to the people, the one that's closest to finding the solutions, and the one that's going to have to implement them anyway. And so you can look at Toronto. They're going to start imposing income tax, it looks like, or progressive property taxes. But we're going to be in for an interesting decade, I think, in terms of local government.
So a cheery topic for sure, I'm figuring by the time we leave here at 4 o'clock, we could probably get this solved. So everyone has their microphone. That's good. Microphones are open on the floor, and you know it's a complicated issue. I was looking back at some stats. 2022, we saw the most housing starts in New Brunswick since the 1970s. yet it's still about 45% less than it was in the 1970s. And this is with all hands on deck and a real focus in declaring a crisis in the province of New Brunswick. Why are we having such a hard time getting things built today? Brent, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, well, through our discussions with developers, the cost of building has gone up considerably. And so has the price of land in a lot of cases. And developers look to gain equity on land. And if they can leverage that equity, it makes the financing of the build a lot easier. But then, as Greg had mentioned, in terms of the labor component, you know, we also need the labor there. So we talk to developers, and they've said challenges from everything from the assurances that they have the labor to proceed with the construction to the cost construction. You know, we have a project in St. John where the driving of piles last year was quoted at $22 million for the build, and this year it's at $2 million. So it's that big of a swing. Like we are seeing costs come down now, which is great, but the costs are still high. And so there's the need to look to a smaller scale. We have a certain lifestyle in New Brunswick that we've become accustomed to, and in Canada in general, particularly though in the Maritimes, I would say. But when you look in Ontario, you know, the acceptance of living in an apartment that's 500 square feet for a one-bedroom is far more tolerant and acceptable than it is in New Brunswick, where you're expecting maybe more 800 or 900 square feet for a one-bedroom apartment. So our lifestyle has to change in order to fit the economic model that will drive the development.
I hear the argument from developers that, you know, prices are so high and the cost of land is so high. By the time I dig the hole, I'm talking about a luxury apartment now, not an affordable apartment. Yet we're seeing so many of them being built and immediately snatched up. So it's an interesting argument that I'm not sure in the long term holds water. You know, Greg, from a provincial perspective, why are we having such a difficult time getting people to build things?
Yeah, I think the challenge that we're seeing is that the organizations, the developers, particularly in the nonprofit sector, don't have necessarily the capacity. They haven't been building for those 30, 40 years, the same as the province hasn't been building. And so I think what we're seeing is a need for capacity building within that sector. And then, you know, to Brent's comment, you know, the workforce. Contractors, you know, I think probably one of the projects that we're working on in St. John, first time I've ever seen that. I mean, I've only been here for 4 years in this sector, but talking to my colleagues, wanting a down payment of like $3 million just to secure the workforce for a project moving forward. Like we've had contracts before where we signed that, but the actual outlay of millions of dollars to ensure that that those contractors, you know, are guaranteed that project moving forward. And I think the other piece is, again, to one of Brent's comments, you know, we need to be innovative. We need to change the way we're doing business. And I think that's one of the challenges that we've had at NB Housing over the last couple of years is we're seeing these really good projects come forward, but they don't fit within our existing funding programs. And so we're needing to pivot as well. And part of the strategy is to do a program review. And that's one of the aspects in all of our programs that we're looking at is how can we change our program to, you know, a program that's been probably hasn't had any policy changes in 10, 15, 20 years to the needs of today. And so we're committed to doing that. We're starting to do these on one-offs, but it's important to look at those standards that we've had, really evaluate them. You know, is a 200 square foot bachelor apartment really something that that we need? If the answer is yes, then we need to change our standards because our current standard right now is 350 square feet. So those are some of the things that we're doing that I think will help spur development, particularly in that sort of deeply affordable market.
Mayor Chamberlain, less than 2% capacity. You know, we hear about these challenges in some of New Brunswick's bigger cities. As a medium-sized city in the province, what are some of the challenges you're seeing to get things built in Bathurst?
Actually, I met with a couple of contractors before coming up. I had a few questions. And our situation is a bit different as well because, and I mean, maybe other rural area may feel the same thing, is they're saying, so the price of, material is the same price whether you build it in Bathurst or you build it in Moncton, okay? So they are willing to invest, and even if the city gives them the land for $1, when they go to the bank with CMHC and the bank will say, hold on, I like the idea, but have you thought of doing that in Moncton as opposed in Bathurst? You'll be able to charge more rent in Moncton and you'll get a better value as to doing it in Bathurst. So these contractors or these investors are having a hard time at the bank level. And they're saying it's extremely frustrating because they're telling them, Fredericton and Moncton, you can charge a lot more rent than you can in Bathurst by $400 or $500. So are you sure this is a good value? And are you sure this is what you want to do in the city of Bathurst? Even though we're giving them the land for $1. That's the issue we're running. And I've had a few contractors tell me that.
Perry, why doesn't Habitat just build a whole lot more houses?
Yeah, and again, I'll speak to us, but also to the issue at large. There's no question we have a supply and demand issue, a basic economics issue. NB Housing hasn't built houses in 30 plus years. Baby boomers are retiring and looking to move into condos and apartments. So, Mike, yes, the economics make sense to build at the high end right now. But traditionally, when you build at the high end, then the older units become the affordable units. But all too often now, either those are then going through renovations or being torn down and for higher end units to be built. So we truly are in a perfect storm. We've got a skilled trade shortage. We have price of land and materials at an all-time high. So why isn't Habitat building more? We're about to be, first off, because we are looking to significantly increase our impact through partnerships with municipalities, with the province, with the federal government, and with the private sector. But it's tough to build. The economics to build affordable right now is very challenging. Because of all of those factors. But that's why I really strongly believe it does need to, the private sector, again, all too often it doesn't make sense. The math doesn't work. So helping the nonprofit sector to increase our impact, I really believe has to be a larger part of the solution right now. Because I don't believe without significantly larger incentives that the private sector are willing to do it.
Herb, as a business owner, when I hear about any market that is desperate for a product, they don't have enough of it, they can't build enough of it, and as quick as you build them, they will be snapped up and you can build some more. Why are we not seeing more expedited growth in housing development?
Well, it's an interesting contrast to after World War II, when a lot of the small places around this town were built in a hurry. Like there was basically an initiative, we need houses in a hurry, they got built. Again, 60s and 70s, there was a lot of building of apartment complexes because baby boomers were coming on. There was a need. What seems to be missing is that since we've fetishized owning houses in Canada over renting, Canada has basically got through the 2008 recession by creating, we bought houses, the rest of the world invested in machinery and equipment, things like that. So we've distorted our housing market pretty bad, and it's hard to unwind that to then turn it around when you pumped up real estate values so much to make it affordable to build things. So you look at what was happening in Ontario with the Greenbelt. They were trying to unlock new land, but you can't just unlock new land. That will go, if it's a car-dependent society, to people with means. So in a lot of cases, when we interviewed homeless people in Calgary about what would help you get housed, they didn't come up with build us houses or build us apartments. They said, well, transit passes would help, because then they can access a stock of housing that's outside of the core. When we went to City Council with a study showing what they could save on not incarcerating people for unpaid transit fines, which was $4 million a year, just by giving them an annual transit pass at the seniors rate of $15 a year, they just said, well, then those people are on the trains. And so what holds you back from getting some of these solutions, it's not about building, it's about where are we trying to build and for whom. And again, it's just not economic for residents to go out to a far-flung area if there's no way to get to work and there's no way to get to services. But you can do planning around that. You just sort of have to get where's the will or where's the way, and sometimes it's going to be not-for-profits that are thinking in those terms, and so reduce their red tape would be one solution. With the things like scarcity of trades, there's groups working on off-site construction. The reputation you get is that off-site construction is low-quality homes. It's actually high-quality premium homes. The trick with them is, because they're making their money by pushing up the margin, is give them an incentive with some volume production and scale economies to produce for a different segment of the market. And so Brandon Searle, who is running the off-site construction research unit at UNB, would be a great guy to bring in and talk about those kinds of solutions. But we have to respect that the trades market is national. And so when you're trying to get trades to build something here, someone's trying to get them to build in Toronto, and if we can't compete on the wages and conditions, we're not going to get them. And we can't train our way out of this. What we're going to get out instead is the old solution I saw at West, which is DIY things where you have professors doing structural engineering on homes to get an extra bedroom for a kid. And so if you want to go that route, you'll get a different housing stock, which you'll have some surprises down the road. But that's how they did it out West, is that it just turned into kind of an informal construction market. And you can decide later on if that was good or bad when you have picture windows falling out in a stiff wind, which we saw. But that's the reality you're looking at. If you can't control it and plan it, someone will do something for you, and it may not be the right thing.
You know, we hear over and over again, we need more affordable housing, affordable housing, affordable housing, affordable housing. Being driven, Mayor Chamberlain talked about the homeless statistics, and those are the sort of official by names list numbers, but the numbers are even greater than that. I sit on Community Development Committee for the Southeast Region Service Commission. We just finished a report that shows in the next 5 years there's another 10,000 people who are vulnerable in their housing situation because of the cost of housing versus their level of income. And it's significant. So is that all we need, is more affordable housing? What kind of housing should we be building? And, you know, if we build, I've heard arguments, we build more high-end luxury, the trickle-down effect will create more affordable housing. Perry says that's not the case because we're transforming all of those into high-end luxury. But at some point, we must say, well, we'll have built enough that trickle-down effect will actually happen. But where should we start? Should we build more affordable? Should we build more, more high-end and push that trickle down? What are you thinking in St. John right now?
Yeah, for in St. John, it's really our needs are more in the intensification in the primary development area. So, that fits, our climate change action plan, our community plan. When you look at the needs, there's a desire to be in the uptown core. Really, there's I would say, a strong need for more micro suites, so smaller units, 1-2 bedroom units. But then we do have a large immigrant population, new immigrants that are also coming with much larger families. So there's a bit of a, a challenge in that, because, if you're coming with 4 or 5 children, the traditional apartment in Uptown St. John won't serve the needs. But, building up, getting more density, that also helps in terms of municipalities. We all have significant infrastructure costs. We have infrastructure deficits that were talked about this morning. And so by building up and not expanding our primary development areas and, pushing more of those funds to expanding of underground water, wastewater, utilities, above ground servicing, all of that will have more resources available to us to actually invest more in the housing and doing more of what the community needs, as opposed to unnecessary expansion of infrastructure.
Greg, Housing for All, as you said, is built on 4 pillars, and affordable housing, social and supported housing, a housing system with a strong foundation. But at the heart of that, there's also market housing, and it appears that the province does believe that we need housing across the spectrum, and we need to allow market forces to also work in our favor to create that trickle-down effect. Is that what we're banking on over the longer term?
Well, I think to some of my colleagues here, some of their comments, absolutely we don't, if we build all high-end, eventually some of those, so we're, affordable units now will become deeply affordable in the future. It takes years, like 7 to 10 years, I think the research says, for that trickle-down effect to work. So, the Housing for All, like the title says, is, the strategy is focused on that entire continuum. I think we need housing starts in all those sectors. And again, we just need to be innovative in the way that we do it. I think there's a shift now. When I started at HNB 4 years ago, affordable housing was affordable housing. It was primarily subsidized housing. That's what we were talking. Now, when you say affordable housing, you're not talking about subsidized housing. So this, the new term is deeply affordable. And so I think we need that, to sort of hit on the, the vulnerable population, those who are experiencing homelessness. We need not just housing, but supportive housing. Those tendencies are not going to be successful if there's not those supports. We used to call them wraparound services, addiction services, mental health supports. And just actually, for some of these people, I think, the mayor said earlier, the numbers of chronic homelessness individuals have increased. A lot of those people haven't been housed for a number of years. They don't know how to live in an apartment. They need those life skills and that training and those supports in order to make those successful. And when they get to that point where they are able to live on their own or with a partner or whatever, then they leave that type of housing into more independent housing. And then, eventually, we talk about moving along that continuum. Wouldn't it be neat to see someone who was homeless today in 10 years, 15 years, own their own home? And at that same time move along that continuum. But we need to have the resources, we need to have units available in each part of that continuum. And so, in order to do that, we need to have incentives to build, we need to have, programs that will finance those builds along that continuum. So that's certainly where we're heading. And to my earlier comment, this is just a beginning, this Housing for All strategy. As we start ticking off some of the initiatives that were listed in that strategy, there's a whole list of others that I would say were, below the line that are going to move up and become, next year's initiatives and the year after and the year after. So, already, I think, just in my own group, we've hit 3 of those initiatives are complete. And so now with the new leadership team, we'll be looking at, okay, what are the other initiatives that we can bring up to impact the development of housing. And again, it might be something on that list, and it might be something totally new that we hear about next year when we do a follow-up session, a follow-up engagement session, and someone might say, this is where we think we should go. Okay, let's put some investment in that area. So,
Mayor Chamberlain, what kind of housing do you need most in Bathurst? Not only today, but when you think about the broader economy and where the city's going over the next 10 years, does that answer change from today and what you need longer term?
Absolutely. Actually, there's a few factors. So, and I'm sure many municipalities are dealing with this. We need to go up. Even though we have land, we're going to be running out of space, so we have to go up. So we've been working on, changing our bylaws. How many stories? Let's change it. Let's go higher. But we have an aging population that it's not behind my backyard. So we are running into a major issue. So this council in our municipality, we're saying we're putting our big boy pants on, and because we're going to get a lot of flack. We have no choice. We have to vote and approve these apartment buildings because we cannot keep doing townhouses, and that's all we're getting is townhouses and townhouses. It's not working for us. We need apartment buildings. So that's number one. Number two, over a year ago, actually at the time, Minister Jill Green was with Housing. We met in Fredericton, and it was all the mayors of the city of Bathurst. And at the time, and I have to say, I was very impressed. And we worked and we did our presentation, we moved toward, and she said, think outside the box. Think outside the box. Habitat Soleil did that. They got, oh my gosh, if not 100 acres of land, and it was Le Couvent des Sœurs. So where the nuns were staying, he made 48 units, very small, 350 square feet, the whole setup. And he did community kitchen, community living space, a huge kitchen for them to be able to share. Why? Because so they wouldn't be isolated by themselves in their small apartment. But there was only a microwave. When he put in the proposal, we ended up getting flack. So we all got together as mayor and our leaders in the area, and we spoke with Minister Jill Green, which is with Social Development, and new Minister for Housing. And we pitched the idea, and we said, listen, we've been saying, let's think outside the box. They won't be isolated. It's going to be affordable. 24 of those will be affordable housing. It's a perfect opportunity for them, long-term, moving long-term, as you get older, instead of necessarily going into a nursing home, you could be living there, but you'll be able to interact with everybody else. So we're saying if we have to put a stove, we'll put a stove. But ideally, it was, you have your kitchenette, you have your microwave, but the purpose behind it, and when it was pitched to the city, we were like, this is a great idea. We need to think outside the box, and I thought that was visionary. The good news is they took it and they went with it, and they're going to get back to us. Make something different. So this way, the rent is going to be so much cheaper and affordable for them.
Perry, Habitat was built on the dream of home ownership, and you and other not-for-profits have argued that leaving it to market forces won't deliver the supply that we need. So you're in the business of affordable housing. Is that the only kind of housing we need in New Brunswick?
No, simply put. There needs to be a focus across the spectrum. We need to see development at all levels, and meeting people where their needs are, and secondly where their desires and their aspirations are. I mentioned earlier there's many baby boomers now moving out of their larger homes, but they still want to have the amenities and the space and the ability to entertain and those kind of things. And if that's what they can afford, wonderful. But we also have people coming out of university and or at university for that matter, who need a different level of housing, and they need different amenities. And I applaud the work that Habitat Soleil have been doing in Bathurst, or Rising Tide has been doing in Moncton, and the Housing First initiative here in Fredericton, because they're looking to meet people where their needs are today. And so, no, I strongly believe we need to have a focus, and as the title of the provincial housing strategy, Housing for All, I think that's a perfect name, because we do need housing for all, and we need to meet people where they are, whether it be supportive housing, where they have those really strong levels of supports, so they perhaps can eventually move into to independent housing, or whether it be housing for seniors, housing for persons with disabilities, and housing for families. We've talked about the immigration factor, and many of those families are large families, but it's not solely the immigrant families that are larger. We have a number of New Brunswick-born families that have a true need. When we look at places like Chipman, or Bathurst, or Edmundston, and hard-working individuals, but their incomes aren't supporting $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $800,000 homes, or $1,500 to $2,500 a month rents. So there needs to be that. We've really started that skew started, I think, about probably 10 years ago, where we were really skewing to that higher end, but we weren't filling back in on the affordable housing side, and it's really gotten out of control. So yeah, I guess that's
Herbert, in a country where the average home price now, I think, is about $750,000. That's the average home price in Canada. In a province where we've actually seen the average home price, I think, increase 90-some% in the last 2 or whatever years, and market demand at all levels at an all-time high, capacity at an all-time low. Our friend Richard Seon, I think he calls it the Ontario refugees that are coming into New Brunswick, buying up all of our housing stock, because even at the most expensive prices, housing in New Brunswick is still affordable housing in Toronto. And will we ever achieve affordable housing in this province?
Well, you can get there 2 ways, a good way and a bad way. And it's a one-time shock that Richard's talking about. We don't know if that in-migration will be sustained. And so from there, we're also now worried about, is it going to reverse, because remote work is unwinding. And there's other cases where if you can't get a doctor here, can you stay once you start hitting your 60s? So there are some risks to what's come in. The one thing we are confident of is Moncton will continue to grow just through the dynamics of intra-provincial migration. But if you now take away a lot of the impacts that were spilling over the rest of the province, you could see a reversal. But one of the things I want to point out is that this discussion of affordable housing and building, we're really talking about making it affordable by reducing the price of the housing unit. The other piece that's critical that the province needs to be involved in is pumping up some kind of stable income assistance, not the minimum wage alone, but actually looking at something like, we have the lowest income assistance rates in Canada. PEI has been dramatically raising they're doing a bunch of programs to keep people in their houses, to bridge them through to the senior pensions when they get a guaranteed annual income through the OAS and GIS. The quickest thing the province could do is start cutting checks to people who are vulnerable in their apartments to keep them there. Then they have an incentive to figure out how to work with municipalities to get the rents down, because they're on the hook by agreeing to do that if they can't figure this out, they're going to at least keep people safe and housed, or go to that. If you create more income side, you create more stimulus for developers to look at different models, because they know they've got a clientele that can afford it. But if our missing market is really the ability to earn enough money through minimum wage jobs and things like that, why aren't we looking at something like a guaranteed basic income, which is what we've been working with Prince Edward Island on for 1.5 years now. We're looking at getting a demonstration project done. And it's fixing the affordability problem in a parallel procedure. The building's going to need to happen, but we also need to remember it's about income of the households. And we're also going to see that we're going to have different definitions of households, economic families versus census families versus nuclear families, which goes into how we transfer income. And we also need to deregulate the conditions for taking provincial income assistance. You should be able to have a bunch of roommates like university students. As I was saying, I dropped my kid at Queens. He's in a 1,300 square foot bungalow with 6 other guys. They're all paying $800 a month. They've made a really expensive house affordable in a hurry because we're not allowed to say to them, we don't think this is a good idea to have 6 guys of your age living in one place. The neighbors don't like it, but they can't do anything. But that's what you're seeing in a lot of university cities, is that students are taking over these houses. The density of occupancy in those houses, it's not one family with 4 people. You're getting 8 to 10 kids in some of the larger ones. So we have to start thinking about when we transfer income to people and we say, but you can't have a roommate, or you can't have an unwed partner, or we start imposing norms like on a family, you have to have a bedroom for each kid. Then you start to make housing more expensive just because you're imposing a social norm on how they're supposed to live. And those are the things I never hear talked about in the affordable housing, is are we putting too many means tests on how we transfer the income, which means if you depend on the government, housing is a lot more expensive than if you can be self-sufficient and generate your own. And that's where I think social development has to be at these meetings, as well as the people talking about housing strategies, because they're the other side of the affordability equation.
So do we need to build more housing, or do we need to change the social norm?
Social norms for transferring income. Again, you're going to see the social norms for housing change whether you like it or not, or observe it. I've been talking to international students. There's a huge informal rental market already emerging in Fredericton. And it doesn't sound like a lot of fun. I had one student, her landlord, I guess, locked the door at 10 and wouldn't let her in after if she was out too late. So she didn't want to stay there too long. In other cases, you'll see people living in basement suites that are informal with not up to code, no fire escapes. Illegal? Sorry, in Calgary, we renamed them informal because there were too many illegal. And so now they're doing an amnesty in some cities to try and convert those. But the cost of doing it is $100,000 to get everything up to code. So now they've got rat lines where you can rat out your neighbors if people are doing that. But again, it's naive to think that if you don't get these things built that people won't figure out a solution. And you may not like the solution. And so that's why it's important to keep ahead of this and be aware of where the pressure points are coming.
So the problem is to find, we know in each of our cities across the province just how desperately we need more housing. Here's what confuses some people. So Mayor Chamberlain said, you know, they have all these nurses coming in and they're already telling them, don't bring your families. We don't have any place for them to go. We saw the federal minister for immigration say we're thinking about putting caps on international students because we have no place for them to live when they get here. In the conversations I've had with universities, they're saying he doesn't have to put a cap. We've already put the cap because they have no place to live. Yet, every one of our cities still has departments of economic development, and they're out there trying to attract and grow and bring in more people. We've got a provincial goal of hitting 1 million people by 2040. Why are we continuing to try to attract more and more and more people when we don't have any place for them to lay their head at night? Brent?
Well, you know, I think we do. Like in St. John, you know, just looking at, and we have the challenges with an older housing stock, but we have 150 to 200 buildings that are vacant and dilapidated. So, you know, and they'll sit there, and what happens to them is that they go on this vacant and dilapidated buildings list. It increases our response as first responders to go out because there's nefarious activity that goes on in those. That's problematic. And then the assessed values go down. They plummet, which has an impact not only on that home, but can have an impact on the surrounding area. So it's a double whammy, double negative to the province and the municipality. in St. John, we're advocating for a vacant building tax. You know, it shouldn't cost people less to own a home that's vacant and dilapidated. It should actually be, there should be a disincentive to vacancy. And if we can quickly repurpose those homes, and instead of them sitting there for years and then becoming, you know, surplus property, and, you know, to Greg's point, the province is working on that, and we've been having discussions with them to be able to bring that house to market in a matter of months as opposed to 5, 6, 7 years like it has taken, because when it sits on the list that long, it gets to a point where you can't save the structure. And so then what happens is the municipality goes in, demolishes it, sends the bill to the province, and they reimburse us for it. So there's a lost opportunity along that entire time horizon. And if we can move quicker and actually and reinvest in them, then we can turn those blights in our community into opportunities and welcome those newcomers into our community.
Anyone else want to talk about why we're still attracting when we have nowhere for them to live?
Correct. Basically, what we're saying to the family is come on your own, settle once you're able to find a place for your family that's suitable, that suits your needs, then bring them in, because we don't want them coming in with children and we don't have a place to put them. That's certainly important. What we've been doing at the City of Bathurst is that we have been seriously working with our local entrepreneurs, trying to see, you know, within our city, attract and say, you know, we're working on succession planning. Who's interested? Talking, because again, we're a huge retirement section. So we do economic development, but we've been trying to do economic development within and how we can work with the CBDCs and the Chamber of Commerce and work together on to make sure that none of the businesses close, that there's succession planning that's moving forward. However, we do have people coming in through the provincial nominee business stream that are coming in and they're looking to buy, so we're going to work with them. Anybody coming in, we have 22 investors coming in next week, and we rented a bus. Seriously, we've got all 22 on the bus, and we're going to be doing a tour to Beldoon all the way to Bathurst. You want to invest in our city? Absolutely, we're going to make it happen. But we're working together to see what can be done. It's difficult to say, don't come.
It's constantly in search
especially for our city, because we want to grow.
Sure.
So,
but
it's
yeah, that constant
it's a
search
double sword.
Constant search for a balance, isn't it? Maybe that's what we could have called the housing strategy, in search of a balance. We're going to take a break. We're going to take a pause and let people stretch their legs just for a sec. I guess we've got a lot of people who have a lot of questions for you. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back, Pierre, in 15 minutes. Is that fair? And we'll come back, and then we're going to open up the floor for questions and put you all on the spot. Thanks. I know we do have a few questions, so I'll open it up for some folks to ask some questions of our group, and I'm sure Herb will be back.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. And first of all, I really appreciate all of sharing all your views and hearing some of the challenges and maybe some of the solutions and long-term possibilities. There's a couple things. One thing that resonates with me, though, I know we talk about, and we use it, you know, whether it's deeply affordable housing or housing geared to income and so on. I think those things need to be clear. But I'm worried a little bit about our current housing stock that we currently have within our communities that are providing that low income. And the question I was posing to Greg and I met via Zoom during COVID-19 because I was involved with Rising Tide. And so that's very close to a number of us in Moncton. And I think it's an excellent model that other municipalities could really look at. And I think the reason I say that is because of the strength of the municipality behind it. And so it opens doors that not-for-profits necessarily don't have. But I was asking about rooming houses. And so, for example, we have a situation in Moncton where whether it's the owner doesn't know and how maybe it's communication, but whether or not there were subsidies available to rooming houses, a single room occupancy. Because we have a number of individuals who live in and are functional in our community, but there's a pressure now to of owners to sell, and we know they will be redevelopment. So what do I tell them, and is it something that your department is open to?
Yeah, we've always, I guess we've always provided subsidies in those. They would be, of course, less or sort of prorated to a one bedroom. That tends to be where we have, that's where CMHC sort of draws the line when they, under our agreement is at a one bedroom. So traditionally we would have looked at a bachelor at 80% of the MMRs of a one bedroom, and single room occupancy down to 60%, 60 or 65% of a one bedroom unit. The difference is that at a certain point, probably 20 years ago, some municipalities stopped allowing the development of SROs, and whether it was bylaw or just zoning requirements. So at that point, the province also stopped investing in the development of those types of units. So we're started to relook at those. Like as I mentioned earlier, we're getting some developers coming with very, very small bachelor units, or units like my colleague here has talked about in Bathurst, where when you look at it, you wouldn't necessarily call it an apartment. There's a small fridge, there's no stove, there's two bathrooms. In this case, it's not, they each have a bathroom, but in some cases we're seeing two bathrooms to one unit, or a communal bathroom for 8 units and things like that. We saw the challenge of that with existing SROs during COVID. The spread of the disease that way, sharing common spaces. So we really want to look at that too as we go. But again, to my point earlier, we are reviewing our programs. So certainly I would tell that landlord to reach out to us. You've got my contact information there, Charles, and we can have that discussion about how we can help preserve those units, because just like you, we don't want to see those units lost. But it's a matter of what you say is, if it didn't fit within our program areas, point fini, it's done.
Right.
Now we're looking at it going, okay, how can we make it fit? Or how can we get the government to invest more money in my program so that I can do that. So I would encourage you to reach out, and we can have that conversation with your constituent and try and solve that problem, because again, we don't want to see those units lost either, because I think they're valuable to the community.
I think that's really good to hear, because I think it is sometimes bureaucratic in nature, and I hope that you can convey that message to others in your department, because I think sometimes that's the frustration, but on the other hand, let's find some solutions. So I think that, and again, that 350 square feet, I mean, it might be 300 square feet, and that's very comfortable for someone, and it may not have to have a stove and so on. So those are the definitions, and I know you've worked closely with Rising Tide, who have done things very differently and initiated some things, but it's been a struggle even for them. And so anyway, I think that those are good things. And it is also too that we have to, I believe, we're having this conversation, but I think we need to bring industry into the conversation. It's important for Irving to have people who work. It's important for Irving, though, to make sure that they can stay. So, years ago, when we look back at what pulp and paper companies used to do, they go into an area, and guess what? You know what? They needed to create housing. They needed to be part of the solution. And I don't know if we've asked them to be part of the solution, but we need to ask them, because it's in their best interest. So I don't hear that often, because we're sort of the ones that bear the brunt all the time of the conversation, but I'd like, and put their money where their mouth is, and they have, like in Chipman, for example, I think they've done that. So I think those are some things we need to do too.
Yeah, under the strategy, there is a component there, or initiative there, in partnership with the Housing Hub of New Brunswick for the rapid rural workforce housing, and part of that program is an employer investment or employer engagement. That program is not just going to build housing for workers, alone. It's going to take a partnership with that organization, with the employer, and with the province, and even further the federal government when it comes to the financing piece to develop those housings. But something similar to what happened in Chipman. There's a need for workers in small rural communities, and you know, it's a matter of working with all those parties to come up with, you know, what's the ideal number? What does that housing look like? Is it purpose-built rentals, or is it single-family residences or duplexes or triplexes on a rent-to-own basis? So we're, again, I believe that that NB or Housing NB is looking to be innovative and looking at different ways of doing business.
I see her worship. Oh,
Just one thing to keep on the radar, you know, the announcement with respect to universities and building housing and so on. I think they will need a lot of help in order to make that happen. And please don't underestimate it, because we've had conversations with some universities that scratch their head and they don't know where to start. And I think they own land, they have the ability, they'll embrace it, but they need the backing to make it happen.
Your worship.
Fund was available to the universities as well, or they could have applied for that as well, but I'm not sure they were all aware of it. But we've talked about a lot of housing, student housing. Some people are looking for housing for the workforce, housing for seniors. We're looking for housing for a very vulnerable population. That's our priority in St. John. And just to add on to what Mayor Kim already said, and Charles, is that we often do project our middle class values onto that, and owning a home is not everyone's dream, and it's not suitable for everyone. So we need to get our heads sort of out of the sand and where we think people should be. We need to give them what they need and what they want. We need some help from the province. And I had been at a chamber meeting, and Minister Steves was there. And so I asked him, I said, if you've got an empty piece of land and you have, you could forfeit the HST to get affordable building that made there, would you go for that? He says, no, we never give up the HST. So right now you've got nothing. You have no HST because nothing's going on, and you have no property taxes because nothing's built there. So I don't understand that math. That seems like you've got $0 anyway. So why don't you invest those $0, those potential $0, into a plan to get some affordable housing? So I don't know how you convince the governments of that, because I find with any government, it's only a 4-year long-term is the max they go out for any planning. So it's a frustrating situation for us in the cities, which I know we're not going to solve it, but I do appreciate having had the panel here, because there's been a lot of variety of discussions and perspectives, and it's given us all some opportunity to think of things and how can we go forward, and how can we, I guess, as a team of 8 cities even band together to advocate for better support. That's really all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship. As we sum up this conversation, I want to bring it back to cities. This is the Cities of New Brunswick AGM. And Greg, I'm going to start with you and put you on the spot a little bit, but when I look at Housing for All, and I look at sort of the focus areas in there, we see partnerships with the not-for-profit sector. We see focus with private sector employers. We see a real emphasis on rural and attracting labor to rural and growth in rural. But at the end of the day, the majority of our people live inside or around our 8 cities. The bulk of our, social challenges from a homelessness perspective exist within our cities. And it's the draw, our cities are the draw of the vast amount of population, and they tend to be the draw of people from outside who are migrating from other parts of this country. What do cities need to do to help move this housing initiative forward? And do you see the evolution of Housing for All having more of a focus with cities?
Well, absolutely. We on here? I think when I started in housing 4 years ago, I think the common comment from municipalities was housing's not our thing. That's the provincial government, it's the federal government. Ask me that question today, and I can guarantee you that everyone in this room, every one of the 8 cities for sure, is taking housing and the need for housing seriously. When we announced our 380 units, $100 million in October, Mayor Michaud from Edmundston, I think, was the first one off the ball. My phone was ringing like within a day, I think it was, and basically saying, you know, we're in. What do you need from us? I hope, I think it was a bit of advocacy as well. We want some of those units. Mayor Chamberlain and I have had the conversation, and her staff, Dieppe as well as St. John, Fredericton, Moncton, all of them. So I think now it's again, to my comment earlier, I said all of government, all of community, it's really, all 3 levels of government need to be partnerships, and we're starting to develop those partnerships, whether it's at the political level, whether it's at the senior leadership level within those communities, and even down to the planners and the directors of the various, a lot of them have affordable housing directors and managers. We're having those conversations at all levels within my organization, and so I think that's important. The other thing I will note, and again, I've never worked for a corporation before, but it's a board of directors led organization. So I think we are definitely looking longer than the 4-year political piece, and I think that's the difference. The one difference I see. Well, there was 2 major differences with the announcement of the corporation. One was a primary only focus on housing. It wasn't child protection, it wasn't adult protection, it wasn't income assistance, it's housing. And I think that's important. And the other piece is that with the corporation, I think it's the ability to do longer term planning, to carry projects and programs over into a greater than 4-year cycle. So I think there's, the time will tell, but that's where my mind is going as a member of the senior leadership team of that is to take it in that direction.
Perry, you're about to be building a lot more houses across the province, and a lot of those within those 8 cities. What do those municipalities need to do more of to help organizations like yours build more?
So I'm glad we're starting to talk solutions. So I've got a short list. First, density and zoning needs to be a focus, and that density may be smaller lot sizes, it may be building higher, it may be building multi-purpose. So again, being creative with density and zoning to encourage more. Modular needs to be part of the solution. The shortage of skilled trades is huge, and it's delayed so many projects. But our modular home builders here in the province do have a unique offering, and they are attractive, and they are well built, and they are energy efficient, or they certainly can be. As long, and speaking of energy efficiency, the talk of kind of focusing on bringing wages up to meet the cost of the home. So many of the homes that are being, not just homes, but homes, apartments, condos that are being built today are being built just barely at the building code, which hasn't changed, by the way, since I think it's 2019. So having a higher focus on energy efficiency, and especially around the building envelope, is going to help that home, apartment, whatever it may be affordable for the long term for the people living in those homes. And the other comment is There absolutely are going to need to be different solutions for different cities. The opportunities in St. John, as an example, where there's so much perhaps underutilized or abandoned buildings, those kind of things, to reuse those lots. Where in other places it might be that there's larger pieces of currently unused or vacant property that's perhaps owned by the province, owned by the municipality, that could be turned over, rezoned, and then used for housing and hopefully more affordable housing. So, but there needs to be a different solutions for different cities. But I really think this is the time, and we can make such a difference over the next few years.
Perry's going to send that to every one of the councils, that list. Herb, the role of municipality in all of this, I think it was the FCM president at lunch who said, municipalities are doing all of these things with only getting 10 cents on the dollar. 45 cents goes to the province, 45 cents goes to the feds. I didn't read off the list of federal incentive programs, the Rapid Accelerator Fund. There are many, many, many different pots of money. What is realistic in terms of the expectation on the role municipalities have to play when at the end of the day, it's ultimately their problem?
I don't think it is only their problem. In a fiscal federal system, you have different revenue powers that are apportioned between municipal, provincial, and federal. You have different spending responsibilities, which can move between. And cities, by default, have been inheriting what I would call neglect on spending responsibilities at other levels of government. So it does warrant a discussion with the higher levels of government about rebalancing revenues with responsibilities. And again, there's going to be a big push over the next couple of years, I think coming out of Toronto in particular, and the University of Toronto, looking at this problem of aligning the revenue capacity of communities with the spending responsibilities. Right now, you're talking about a situation where cities are doing their best with what they've got, and they're limited through legislation and the levers that are available. And so it leads sometimes to what would be inflammatory things like we've got to increase a tax on this or do something else. And silent in the background are the provinces and the federal government that aren't pitching in to say, okay, we could resolve this by, like the gas tax is a sore point because in the big cities, they wanted to toll more infrastructure to get the commuters. And if they could toll, they could borrow against the revenues. That would give them sustainable money for dealing with social spending. Kathleen Wynne in Toronto canceled that because Mississauga, Brampton, all the voters out there were outraged. So she gave gas tax, which meant Toronto couldn't borrow against the revenue. They couldn't do all the social stuff they'd inherited. And so again, what was overdue was bringing that conversation around just how are you going to align the revenue powers of the local government with the responsibilities. And so when the provinces complain the feds won't meet with them to talk meaningfully about it, they're also guilty of it, I think, with local government. And the current framework about consolidating wasn't a solution. It was a change, and there's still more work to be done. But right now, I think it's fair to say cities don't have the revenues that they need in order to do this. And so it turns back to being innovative on what incentives do we have to sort of help different parties work with us. And in the not-for-profit sector, there's just too much headache figuring out what the pots of money are and the programs are, writing the different proposals to fit the different pots, doing all the reporting. Like the administrative burden on taking any federal grants right now is just a nightmare. Like the reporting alone probably uses up, you need a metric like how many house units per year are occupied just by employing people to do the reporting type thing. And that's a measure of regulatory burden that's been used in some jurisdictions, but that's not an appreciated part when you try to deal with federal programs, just how onerous it becomes on an organization with very little administrative capacity to do it. Universities don't mind it. They got whole departments of people doing it. But when you get out in a not-for-profit sector, you usually have a board. You don't have a lot of staff to do this kind of thing. And so maybe cities could have a coordinating role on something like that. But it's not the usual things that you talk about in terms of how do we get these programs? Maybe it's going to be Housing for All comes into a role like that, much more of a coordinating body. But again, these solutions have been around for a while, but in New Brunswick, no one ever seems to move on them at the provincial level.
So Brent, as the Chief Operating Officer for Canada's oldest incorporated city, which probably means some of the oldest infrastructure in Canada, and 10 cents on the dollar coming back to you to solve all those problems, what do you do? What is the role a city can play in pushing this forward?
Well, as Herb was just saying, you know, we have been really pursuing dollars from others, like trying to leverage every municipal dollar to the maximum extent possible. So every municipal dollar, you know, on our capital program, we want it matched with either provincial and federal or some sort of addition there to really address the infrastructure deficit. But I just want to touch on Herb's point as well, because I think it's an important point, something we just lived through with the Rapid Housing Initiative. And you know, the CMHC application process. So we did undertake that coordination role because we do have lots of nonprofits in St. John. So we led that initiative, but with that comes a significant burden, a larger burden than we anticipated, because all of the risk from CMHC gets pushed down onto the municipality. And so we got the one project, as I mentioned, $4.5 million. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of restrictions, a lot of things, a lot of criteria you have to adhere to. And you're turning over those funds to a nonprofit entity who has limited capacity, very limited capacity. And we're developing back-to-back agreements to try and transfer that risk. But we know a nonprofit doesn't have the financial means to deal with the loss of $4.5 million. So at the end of the day, it's really transferring the risk onto taxpayers, municipal taxpayers. So if things go sideways with our Rapid Housing Initiative, it's the taxpayers of St. John who are on the hook, which, you know, so there's complexities. Like we as municipalities are trying to push the envelope to really take advantage of these. But then, you know, we are already burdened, to your point, around 10 cents on the dollar with trying to deliver the municipal services. But at the same time, add to that, you know, you don't want to miss the opportunity, but then you're taking on this risk. So we are, you know, I guess to answer your question, looking to leverage every dollar, but with that comes a lot of challenges.
Your Worship, as we wrap up Municipality Week here in New Brunswick, and Municipality Week was designed to celebrate staff and volunteers and leaders within our municipalities who are really closest to their citizens, providing those day in and day out services. Yet in New Brunswick, it continues to be the lowest voter turnout for municipal government elections. It continues to sort of be the most misunderstood in terms of what your roles and responsibilities are. And I'm a bit of a junkie on municipal political campaigns, which is really weird, I know, but very few of you have ever been elected on this promise of solving the housing crisis. Now in role as mayor and the pressures that you and council deal with on a day in and day out basis, what's the role you see a municipality playing in helping to solve New Brunswick's housing crisis moving forward?
That's a good question. So I'll go back to this whole CMHC funding program with the federal government. On July 11th, actually, I had the pleasure with some of the mayors of the 8 cities to get invited at Frank McKenna's house with his wife. Wonderful people. Honorable Ahmed Hussein, who was the Minister of, I want to make sure, Housing, Diversity and Inclusion, was there with us. So he had his assistants, and we were talking about this program. And we were quite excited. So we started having a conversation, and he was saying, think outside the box, look at what you're housing, change your bylaws, do what needs to be done. Here's your opportunity for New Brunswick. Here's a chance, get the housing. I get back call a meeting where economic development CEO, I'm all excited and I'm saying, we need to do this and we need to think big because we were told to think big. Even Trudeau, after the fact, said think big, but it was already done. The applications were sent. When we sat down, we start working on it in our application, our rep from CMHC said, oh, whoa, okay, no, that's not going to work. That's not realistic. What do you mean? Well, no. Listen, you're just going to get refused. If you put that in, you're going to get refused. Okay, well, what is realistic then? We are saying we know that there's over hundreds of families, 632 overall. We have opportunities. We're talking with our investors and our developers that are willing to move forward. But we had to apply through CMHC half those numbers. It's a joke what we'd have applied for in hopes that we will get approved, because if we applied for the original number we wanted, we were told, and it's not that high. I think it's a little over 500 units. But we had to apply for about, 252 units because CMHC said we're going to get refused. So it's kind of difficult. And we don't have financially, we're not set to do dollar for the dollar. We're a population of 15,000 people. So we do need the help. And especially in the middle of this reform that is costing small regions a lot more money than we anticipated, we feel that it's been downloaded on our back. So we're going to be in a position on how we're going to balance that budget. We're talking about public transportation. We put in the study. We're working with Belle Bay and the other regions because housing, they can't, everybody's coming to work in Bathurst, but they can't all live in Bathurst. I'd love to have them for the population, but it's not realistic. So if they can live in Greenpoint, which is part of Belle Bay, good. So we're putting public transportation. We're realizing the millions of dollars we're going to need to invest in our portion of it, even if there's funding out there. But then when we are going to want to start the operation, we're looking at $1.5 million in operation costs. That's why I really enjoyed, conseillère, quand vous l'avez dit tantôt, si on pourrait avoir de l'aide financière pour l'opération, au moins pour débuter, pour mettre les choses en place, on serait en meilleure situation. So instead of starting in September for our transportation, it may only start in 2025 because we're in the middle of a reform. We're trying to find housing. We want to do transportation, and we have to give a lot of money to the Regional Service Commission this year.
Last question to each of you. I'm going to start with you.
That's a lot.
I'm going to start with you, Brent. If we could only do one thing, if we could only do one thing that would have the biggest impact on our housing crisis today, what would it be?
Work together. Work together to deliver, just Greg and I had to work together on the RHI project. We're all trying to achieve the same outcomes. And by just the province or NB Housing working with us, it's helped make our lives easier in terms of advancing the project. So I think we're all here. We all want to move. We all want to address the issue. And by working together, supporting one another, being creative, I think that will help us get faster towards the end goal.
Greg, one thing.
That was my one thing.
No, so you have to pick a different one thing.
But along with that, with partnership, I think it's innovation and coming to the table early. It's difficult in my world to sort of be surprised with an idea the day that the decision needs to be made. Better to involve Housing NB early on in the planning and work together as partners to bring these projects to fruition.
1-800-CALL-GREG. Your Worship, what's the one thing?
Actually, as a quick win, I really love the idea of people that are on low-income housing or on disability that are living, they have to live on their own. They're not allowed to have someone living with them. If we were able to allow these people to have a roommate partner, or even if they had a spouse and they're both on, or a friend, if we could put low income together in one unit, that would eliminate some of the areas. I really like that idea that the provincial government putting pressure should change with social development. They should change the process and allow these people to be able to live together, in even if they were to rent a house, because then you're taking this because you're not allowed. And I know my daughter's best friend, her mom is on disability, and her rent is $650, and she gets a little over $500 a month, but she's not allowed to have someone living with her to help her pay that rent.
Greg's writing it down. Having the same minister for both departments has to have some efficiencies in it, for sure. Perry, one thing.
Recognizing the many financial constraints that our municipalities are facing, but I'm going to use the word invest. And that investment in housing may be through land, it may be through waiving of fees, it may be through outright financially supporting, because ultimately it is an investment, because that increases the tax base, and that money will be returned many times over the next several years.
Herb, what's the one thing?
Listen to the other four panelists.
My one thing is we need to have these conversations over and over again within every community. It's a complicated issue that people don't understand, and it's hard for people to fathom why we need to do all of these things and at the speed with which they need to be done. So my encouragement to all of you is continue to tell this story, continue to communicate, continue to talk about the role that each of the partners needs to play to move this forward, because we don't have any time to wait. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to the panel. We've got Greg Forestell, Perry Kendall, Brent McGovern, Herb Emery, and Her Worship Kim Chamberlain. Big round of applause for them.